The morning of June 22, 1941 dawned over Eastern Europe. Dew glistened on the fields, birds sang, carefree. But the peace was deceptive. In the early morning twilight, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military attack in history, aimed at the Soviet Union. Millions of German soldiers poured across the border. Their goal, the destruction of communism and the conquest of Lebensraum, living space, in the East. The Battle of Uman, in July and August 1941, was a crucial part of this gigantic confrontation. At Uman, in the heart of Ukraine, two armies faced each other. The German army, driven by ideology and the promise of a swift victory, and the Red Army, surprised by the attack but determined to defend their homeland. The Battle of Uman would be a taste of the brutality that would characterize the war on the Eastern Front, a battle of tanks and planes, of artillery bombardments and infantry engagements, but above all a tragedy for the millions of soldiers and civilians who got caught in the maelstrom of war. In the coming days and weeks, we will examine the events at Uman in detail. We will analyze the strategies of both sides, describe the experiences of the soldiers, and discuss the impact of the battle on the course of the war in the East. The war that erupted in June 1941 raged across a vast landscape. The Ukrainian plain, a green ocean of wheat fields and sunflowers, became the stage for gigantic military maneuvers. Villages and cities, until then unknown outside the Soviet Union, became synonymous with the cruelty of the war: Kiev, Kharkov, Stalingrad. For the German military leadership, Ukraine was an important objective. The region was rich in raw materials, grain to feed the German population, coal and iron ore for the war industry. But Ukraine also had great symbolic value. It was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, the heart of the Soviet economy. The conquest of Ukraine would be a severe blow to the morale of the Soviet population and to the Red Army's ability to continue the war. The German military leadership was convinced that the Soviet Union, weakened by Stalin's Great Purge and the inefficiency of the communist economy, would quickly collapse. However, the reality proved to be different. The Soviets fought with a ferocity that the Germans had not expected. The vastness of the country, the poor infrastructure, and the tenacity of the Red Army slowed the German advance. The war that Hitler had planned as a blitzkrieg, a lightning war, threatened to turn into a war of attrition. The German attack doctrine was based on the concept of blitzkrieg. This was a revolutionary military strategy that had been developed in the 1930s. Blitzkrieg was based on speed, surprise, and the combined use of tanks, aircraft, and infantry. The German tanks, the Panzers, formed the spearhead of the attack. They were faster and better armed than their Soviet counterparts. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had complete control of the skies in the early stages of the war. German Stuka dive bombers wreaked havoc behind enemy lines. The blitzkrieg tactic was very effective in the early stages of the war. The German armies advanced rapidly into the Soviet Union, encircling entire armies and inflicting heavy losses on the Red Army. The Soviet troops were often poorly armed, poorly trained, and poorly led. They were completely taken by surprise by the speed and firepower of the German attack. However, blitzkrieg also had its limitations. The German logistical lines became longer and longer as the advance progressed. The Soviets fought with fanatical courage, and the vastness of the country, the mud in the fall and the extreme cold in the winter, worked to the advantage of the defenders. The Battle of Uman began in late July 1941, when the German armies crossed the Dnieper and southern Bug rivers. The goal was to encircle and destroy the Soviet armies located east of these rivers. The German troops advanced rapidly, aided by their superior mobility and air power. The Soviet armies, commanded by Generals Mikhail Kirponos and Semyon Budyonny, were trapped. They had been ordered to stand their ground, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and constantly bombed by the Luftwaffe. The situation was hopeless, but the Soviet soldiers fought with the courage of despair. On August 8, 1941, the pincer closed at Uman. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were trapped. The German propaganda spoke of a new Cannae, a reference to the famous battle of antiquity in which Hannibal destroyed the Roman legions. However, the reality was different. This was not a classic battle, but a chaotic and bloody struggle for survival. The encircled Soviet troops tried with all their might to break out. They were confronted by a ruthless enemy. The German soldiers were disciplined and well-trained, but they were also driven by a racist ideology that regarded the Slavic population as inhuman. One of the German units that took part in the Battle of Uman was the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking. This division, formed in 1940, consisted of volunteers from Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands and Flanders. The Viking Division was known for its fanaticism and its cruelty. The soldiers of the Viking Division saw themselves as elite warriors, as crusaders against Bolshevism. They had been indoctrinated with the Nazi ideology that regarded the Slavic population as Untermenschen, as vermin that had to be exterminated. This racist indoctrination, combined with the brutality of the war, led to countless war crimes. The Viking Division was involved in the fighting around the town of Podvysoka, where thousands of Soviet soldiers were trying to break out. The fighting was fierce and bloody. The soldiers fought hand-to-hand with bayonets and hand grenades. The streets were littered with corpses. The Battle of Uman was a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. The German victory was overwhelming, but the cost was high. The ferocity of the fighting left deep scars on the soldiers of both sides. The myth of the clean Wehrmacht, the idea that the German army had not been guilty of war crimes, was gone forever. The encirclement at Uman was a catastrophe for the Red Army. The so-called Uman Pocket became a place of despair and destruction. The Soviet soldiers trapped in the encirclement had little food, ammunition, and medical supplies. They were constantly bombed by the Luftwaffe and shelled by German artillery. The wounded moaned in pain. The stench of death and decay hung heavy in the air. The Soviet soldiers who tried to escape were mowed down by German machine guns or captured by SS units. General Kirponos, the commander of the Soviet Southwestern Front, was wounded and committed suicide to avoid capture. Thousands of Soviet soldiers surrendered, hoping for mercy from the enemy. But the German soldiers, driven by propaganda and hatred, treated the prisoners of war with extreme cruelty. The prisoners of war were herded into makeshift camps, where they died of hunger, thirst, and disease. Many were shot by the SS, who regarded the Slavic population as Untermenschen. The atrocities that took place at Uman were a harbinger of the Holocaust that would follow later in the war. The Battle of Uman was a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. The German victory was overwhelming, but the cost was high. The ferocity of the fighting left deep scars on the soldiers of both sides. The myth of the clean Wehrmacht, the idea that the German army had not been guilty of war crimes, was gone forever. The Battle of Uman was a Pyrrhic victory for the Wehrmacht. Although the Germans had succeeded in encircling and destroying the Soviet armies, the victory had come at a high price. The delay the Germans had suffered gave the Red Army time to regroup and build new defensive lines. Moreover, the brutality of the fighting and the massacres of Soviet prisoners of war had a counterproductive effect. Instead of demoralizing the Soviet population, it strengthened their will to resist. The war on the Eastern Front had turned into a total war, a struggle for life and death. The Battle of Uman was a harbinger of the horrors that were yet to come. The Wehrmacht advanced on Kiev, which fell in September 1941. But the hope of a quick victory had vanished. The road to Moscow lay open, but the German advance got bogged down in the mud and snow of the Russian winter. The Battle of Stalingrad, which began in the fall of 1942, would be the turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. The German defeat at Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end of the Third Reich. The Battle of Uman, though lesser known, was an important step on the road to Stalingrad. The Battle of Uman was a crucial battle in the early stages of Operation Barbarossa. The German victory was overwhelming, but it came at a high cost. The battle marked a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front, both strategically and morally. The German blitzkrieg tactic, so effective in the early stages of the war, began to falter. The logistical problems of the Wehrmacht were growing. The Soviets, though badly hit, fought with undiminished ferocity. The myth of the quick victory had vanished. The brutality of the fighting and the massacres of Soviet prisoners of war had a counterproductive effect. Instead of demoralizing the Soviet population, it strengthened their will to resist. The war on the Eastern Front had turned into a total war, a struggle for life and death. The Battle of Uman was a harbinger of the horrors that were yet to come. The road to Moscow lay open, but the German advance got bogged down in the mud and snow of the Russian winter. The war on the Eastern Front would last for more than 3 years and claim millions of lives. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me for more videos. Stay tuned for more exciting content. See you in the next one.